Welcome to Dark Surge. The world we live in is often painted in bright colors and reassuring lies. But what happens when you strip away the color? What happens when all that is left are the heavy ink lines of reality and the deep, suffocating shadows where our worst nightmares hide? Tonight, we are not looking at blurry camera footage or questionable security tapes. We are exploring 3 documented occurrences, reconstructed through the visceral, gritty lens of dark graphic illustrations. These stories rely on a very specific kind of psychological terror, the kind that creeps up your spine and makes you question the dark corners of your own room. Let us begin with the first tale. Our first sequence takes us to the underground subway systems of Tokyo in the late autumn of 1998. It was 1:45 a.m. The final train of the night, known locally as the Ghost Train, was carrying only a handful of exhausted passengers. Among them was a young office worker named Kenji. After a grueling 16-hour shift, all he wanted to do was close his eyes and let the rhythmic swaying of the train put him to sleep. He deliberately sat in the last car, seeking total isolation. For the first 20 minutes, the ride was peaceful. The muted, cinematic tones of the city flashed by outside the glass. But then, the train stopped unexpectedly between 2 stations. The lights flickered and died, leaving the car bathed in high-contrast black and white shadows. From the emergency backup bulbs, Kenji woke up to the sudden silence. The heavy ink lines of the surrounding darkness seemed to press in on him. He wasn't entirely alone anymore. Sitting at the far opposite end of the long subway car was another passenger, someone who had not been there when Kenji boarded. The figure was dressed in a completely black, oversized trench coat. Its head was lowered, hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. At first, Kenji tried to ignore it. He closed his eyes, hoping the train would restart, but the psychological tension in the air was becoming unbearable. He felt an overwhelming sensation that he was being watched. Slowly, he opened his eyes and looked down the aisle again. The figure had moved closer, not by walking. There had been absolutely no sound of footsteps. It was simply sitting 3 seats nearer to him than before. Kenji's heart began to pound against his ribs. He blinked rapidly, thinking his exhausted mind was playing tricks on him in the gritty, noir-like atmosphere. He rubbed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the figure was gone. The opposite end of the car was completely empty. A wave of immense relief washed over him. He let out a long, shuddering breath. It was just a hallucination born of extreme fatigue. Or so he thought. I want you to look closely at this next illustration. Observe the reflection in the dark, dirty glass window right next to Kenji's face. The entity hadn't disappeared. It had moved directly into the seat right behind him. Its face was something out of a Junji Ito nightmare. A pale, stretched visage with eyes that held absolute malice, staring unblinkingly at the back of Kenji's neck. The train suddenly lurched violently forward, the lights snapping back on with a blinding flash. Kenji jumped up, turning around to face the seat behind him. There was no one there. The train arrived at the next station and Kenji ran out, never looking back. To this day, he refuses to take the subway after midnight. What was that entity? A phantom, a demon, or a manifestation of the city's collective exhaustion and despair? We may never know. Our second story moves from public transportation to the most intimate and supposedly safe place in the world, our own homes. In 2005, a university student named Maya rented a cheap top-floor apartment in a very old building. The architecture was full of strange quirks and heavy shadows. The most disturbing feature of the apartment was a large rusted metal ventilation grate, located directly above her bed. For the first few weeks, Maya slept soundly, but eventually the scratching started. It wasn't the frantic scuttling of a mouse or the heavy thuds of a raccoon. It sounded deliberate, methodical, like long fingernails slowly dragging across the cold iron bars. The psychological horror of trying to sleep while something is moving just inches above your face began to take a heavy toll on Maya's sanity. One night, the scratching stopped completely. It was replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. The kind of silence that feels like a physical weight pressing down on your chest. Maya lay frozen in bed. She didn't dare to turn on the lamp. Through the dim moonlight filtering through the window, she stared at the ceiling grate. Notice the cross-hatching shadows in this frame. Look at the spaces between the iron bars. There is something there. Something that is actively blocking the deep darkness of the vent. A solitary bloodshot eye, wide open, devoid of any human empathy, was staring directly down at her. It wasn't moving. It wasn't blinking. It was just watching. Maya's breath hitched in her throat. The terror paralyzed her. And then, a hoarse, whispering voice drifted down from the vent. It spoke only 3 words in a grating, unnatural tone. "I am hungry." Suddenly, 2 incredibly long, bony hands covered in dirt and dark, ink-like fluid, violently thrust through the gaps in the iron grate, reaching down towards Maya. Maya screamed, rolled off the bed, and ran out of the apartment without grabbing a single possession. She called the police from a neighbor's phone. When the authorities arrived and broke into the ceiling space, they found no one. However, what they did find was deeply disturbing. The dust had been cleared away directly above Maya's grate. Surrounding it were hundreds of disturbing, intricate drawings scratched into the wood, completely covering the ceiling space. The drawings were identical to the entity Maya had seen. Whoever or whatever had been living up there had been watching her every single night. Before we move on to our final and perhaps most terrifying visual record, ask yourself, have you ever looked at the dark corners of your ceiling and felt that you weren't alone? Our third and final story revolves around a very simple, everyday item, a Polaroid camera. Photography is meant to capture reality, to freeze a moment in time so it never changes. But what if the camera captures something that the human eye cannot perceive? In 1999, an urban explorer named David bought a second-hand camera from a mysterious antique shop. He decided to test it inside an abandoned hospital, known for its dark history. The hospital had been shut down decades ago after a scandal involving unethical psychological experiments. The atmosphere was incredibly oppressive, dripping with noir-like dread. David walked down the long, empty corridor of the psychiatric ward. He lifted his camera and took a photo of the seemingly empty hallway. As the photo slid out and began to develop, David continued walking. He didn't look at the image immediately, choosing to wait until the chemical process finished. When he finally stopped to inspect the picture, his blood ran cold. The image didn't just show an empty hallway. The high-contrast black and white chemicals had revealed something horrifying. The heavy ink lines of the photo depicted dozens of tall, unnaturally thin, distorted shadow figures, standing at the doorway of every single patient room, staring directly at the camera. David lowered the photo and looked down the actual hallway in front of him. It was completely empty. There were no figures, no shadows out of place. He looked back at the photo. The figures in the image had moved. They were no longer standing at the doorways. They were stepping forward, closer to the foreground of the picture. The photo was physically altering itself, reacting to his presence in real time. Panic set in. David threw the photo on the ground and started sprinting back towards the main entrance. The heavy silence of the hospital was suddenly broken by the sound of dragging footsteps behind him. He didn't dare to look back. He ran until his lungs burned, bursting through the rusted front doors and out into the cold night air. The next day, David gathered a group of friends and returned to the hospital in broad daylight to retrieve the camera and the photograph. They found the camera smashed to pieces on the floor, and next to it was the Polaroid. But the image had changed one final time. I want you to examine the heavy ink details of this final illustration very carefully. The figures were gone. Instead, the entire frame was filled with a single, massive, distorted face. Its skin was cross-hatched with agony, and its mouth was wide open, trapped forever in a silent scream. But the most chilling detail wasn't the face itself. It was the background visible just behind the entity's twisted shoulder. The background wasn't the hospital hallway. The entity had taken a picture of itself, standing inside David's own bedroom. 3 visual records, 3 manifestations of psychological terror. The gritty reality is that the ink lines of our world are much thinner than we think. What hides in the shadows of your daily commute? Who is listening to you sleep? From the spaces above your ceiling? And what unseen things surround you right now, just waiting to be caught on film? Let me know your thoughts on these terrifying encounters in the comments section down below. Which illustration haunted you the most? If you enjoyed this journey into the dark, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another descent into madness. You've been watching Dark Surge. Keep your eyes open, and until next time, beware the shadows.